All right, let's just jump right in. Imagine a movement that's about to change the entire world. But right now, in its infancy, it's a total mess. It's chaotic, and nobody can seem to agree on what it's even supposed to be. We're diving into the 2nd century, a time when Christianity was having a massive identity crisis, a real battle for its very soul.
You know, it seems like such a simple question today, but back then, that was the question. I mean, there was no single agreed-upon Bible, no universal creed, no pope, no central headquarters. Absolutely everything was up for grabs.
The best way to think about it is like a startup. Seriously, the early Christian movement had this world-changing product, right? But it had no unified brand, no instruction manual, and definitely no clear CEO. You had all these different competing visions for the company, all vying for market share, and the stakes, they couldn't possibly have been higher.
Now, to really get what was going on, you have to understand this one key term, heresy. It actually comes from a Greek word, hieresis, which at first just meant choice or a school of thought. But pretty soon, it came to mean a choice that went way against the grain. And in the 2nd century, some incredibly powerful thinkers were making some seriously radical choices.
So, let's meet our first major challenger. This is a man who proposed a complete and total reboot of the entire Christian faith. His name was Marcion, and his ideas were not only incredibly popular, they were profoundly threatening to the church that was just starting to find its footing.
Now, Marcion wasn't some fringe thinker shouting on a street corner. He was a rich, influential shipbuilder. He shows up in Rome with a ton of cash and this one incredibly bold idea. Christianity, he said, had been corrupted by its Jewish origins, and he was the one who was going to fix it. He didn't just talk either. He started his own church, and it grew so fast it became a major competitor to what we now think of as the mainstream church.
Okay, so this is the heart of Marcion's whole argument, and wow, was it explosive. He basically argued that Christians were worshiping two completely different gods. On one side, you have the creator God from the Old Testament. In Marcion's view, this was a lesser, judgmental deity who made our flawed, broken world. But then on the other side, you have the true God, the Father revealed by Jesus, a totally separate, strange God of pure love and mercy who had nothing to do with creation. You had to pick one, and Marcion was convinced the church had picked the wrong one.
So what was his plan to fix it? His reboot? Step 1, he tossed out the entire Old Testament. Just gone. Step 2, he created his own Bible, which, by the way, was the first ever attempt at a fixed New Testament. It was a heavily edited Gospel of Luke and 10 of Paul's letters. Why Paul? Because Marcion believed Paul was the only apostle who really understood Jesus' message. And finally, his followers lived a very strict life, rejecting things like meat and sex because they saw the physical world as fundamentally flawed.
As you can imagine, his opponents were, well, let's just say they were not fans. The church father Tertullian fired off this amazing insult, calling Marcion the Pontic mouse who has gnawed the Gospels to pieces. It just perfectly captures the anger, the feeling that Marcion wasn't just disagreeing, he was vandalizing the faith.
But Marcion wasn't the only one who felt that the physical world was a problem. Our next group, the Gnostics, took that idea and ran with it. Now, this wasn't one single church like Marcion's. It was more of a diverse spiritual mood, a movement that offered a path to salvation, not through faith, but through secret divine knowledge. It all comes down to that name, Gnosticism. It's from the Greek word gnosis, and it just means knowledge. See, for a Gnostic, you weren't saved by believing in something that happened in history, like the crucifixion. No, you were saved by receiving a secret divine insight, a special knowledge about the true nature of reality, and more importantly, your true spiritual self.
So while there were tons of different Gnostic groups, they often shared a kind of core story. It goes something like this. Way up high, there's a perfect, totally spiritual God. But then there's a cosmic accident, a disaster in the divine realm. From that disaster, a lesser, ignorant God emerges, and this is the guy who creates our physical world. For the Gnostics, this world isn't a gift, it's a prison. But, and this is the key, a divine spark from that higher world is trapped inside certain special people. A messenger, a redeemer, then comes to reveal the secret gnosis you need to wake up, escape your material body, and finally go home.
For centuries, pretty much everything we knew about the Gnostics came from the people who hated their guts. It was like trying to understand a political party by only reading its opponent's attack ads. But then, everything changed. In 1945, a farmer in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, literally stumbled on a sealed jar full of ancient books. It was a lost library of Gnostic scriptures. For the first time ever, we could hear them in their own words, and it totally revolutionized how we see this fascinating ancient movement.
Okay, so you've got these two massive challenges hitting the early church, Marcion's reboot and the Gnostic secret knowledge. So how did the mainstream church respond? Well, it didn't just fight back. It was forced to build its own immune system. It had to figure out, for the very first time, what it actually meant to be a Christian. This whole identity crisis ended up being the ultimate catalyst. The mainstream church realized it couldn't just be this loose collection of communities anymore. To survive, it had to define itself, to draw some lines. So faced with these powerful competing visions, the Great Church, as it started calling itself, was forced to build a solid foundation. And it did so with 3 pillars of authority that would end up defining Christianity for the next 2,000 years.
Pillar number 1, the canon. This was a direct counterattack. Marcion took a knife to the scriptures, and the Gnostics were writing dozens of new gospels? Fine. The church drew a line in the sand. It said, no, this is our official, authoritative list of books. They made it clear the Old Testament was non-negotiable, and they established a fixed set of writings that became the New Testament. It was a shared foundation for everyone.
Pillar number 2, the creed. This was all about making the faith clear and open. To fight back against the Gnostics' secret, exclusive knowledge, the church developed these short, public summaries of belief. A creed was something anyone could learn, anyone could say. It was a public declaration. This is what we believe. This is our story. It made the core of the faith available to everyone. No secret handshakes, no hidden levels.
And pillar number 3, the bishops, or what's called apostolic succession. This was the organizational answer. How do you deal with all these charismatic but, in their view, rogue teachers? You create a clear chain of command. The logic was simple and powerful. Jesus taught the apostles. The apostles appointed the first bishops, and those bishops appointed their successors, on and on in a direct, traceable line. It created a stable structure and a clear teaching authority that could survive any storm.
So the Orthodox side won. Marcion's church and the Gnostics eventually faded away. But, the story doesn't really end there. The legacy of these so-called heresies is way more complex, and frankly, more important than you might think.
And here's the big takeaway. Marcion and the Gnostics weren't just historical footnotes. They were the catalysts. By challenging absolutely everything, they forced the mainstream church to decide what was essential, what was non-negotiable. It's like they were the grain of sand that irritates the oyster, forcing it to create a pearl. Without the heretics, those 3 pillars we just talked about, the canon, the creed, and the bishops, they might never have been built, at least not as quickly or as strongly.
And that leaves us with one last, really fascinating question to chew on. These debates in the 2nd century literally define the shape of a major world religion, and through it, so much of world history. So just take a second and imagine, what if they had lost? What would our world look like today if Marcion's two-God Christianity had won out? Or if the Gnostic path of secret spiritual knowledge had become the dominant faith? It's a pretty powerful thought to end on.